In my senior year of high school, I remember that I, alongside most of my classmates, was applying for and hoping to get admission into all these colleges that most of us consider to be good schools, in quotes, where we kind of would get bragging rights if we got into them. But as the months went by and some people were able to pull that off, I was not one of them, because I didn't get into the school that I wanted, which was the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and much less did I get any of those other good schools. And I instead ended up having to settle for George Washington University, which is how I perceived it at the time. And so my response to that was that I just kind of gave up on myself, and I kind of threw my hands in the air, and I figured, there's not really any point in trying to achieve any of these goals that I've set for myself or to achieve greatness as I saw it, because I'm just kind of destined for mediocrity. But in this video, I want to point out why I think that's the wrong outlook to have, and what I think it should be instead, how you really should be responding to things if you ever find yourself in a similar position where you feel like giving up on yourself in response to a setback. So the major flaw with this argument is that it turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy, where if you believe that there's no point in trying to achieve something, then you're not going to try, and you're pretty much guaranteed that it's not going to happen. And I saw the consequences of that firsthand, because even after high school, I still had and I still have a lot of life left to live, and so do you. And so other opportunities presented themselves to me that ultimately ended up passing me by, because I never believed that something like that would even be remotely possible. So I wasn't prepared for those opportunities when they presented themselves to me. So as an example, I remember I once got very close to getting a job with a highly prestigious organization, which would have been a huge step forward in my career. But I ended up getting cut at the very last second, even though I had made it through the first few hurdles of the application, because I hadn't lived my life up until that point in accordance with the standards that they expected of their prospective employees and applicants. And the reason I hadn't done that was because, like I said, I had given up on myself, and I never thought something like this would be even remotely possible. So what was the point of even trying? But it was possible. And at that point, I really only had myself to blame, because I started thinking, had I done something differently back then, or rather had I not given up on myself and instead I believed in myself, would I have done something differently, and would things be different now? And the answer was more than likely yes. But at that point, it was too late. Now, another consequence is, as they say, emotions are contagious. So if you have a low sense of self-worth, then other people are more than likely also going to perceive you that same way, as though your worth is low. And it's very difficult to believe that something's true about you if you yourself don't believe it. That's kind of how that works. And the opposite also applies. And people are also going to avoid you because nobody really enjoys the company of somebody who just has a low sense of their self-worth and is depressed and self-deprecating all the time. So as a different example, I remember back in high school and college, I kind of gave up on myself socially in a few different senses, because I perceived that everybody else had their friend groups and they were getting invited out to do stuff and I wasn't. And so therefore, on a fundamental level, I was not worthy. That's what I assumed of having friends. But then I brought that low energy and that low sense of self-worth to my interactions, and then newsflash, people picked up on that and they didn't want to be my friend, because nobody wants to be friends with somebody who thinks that they're not worthy of having friends, because there's probably a shred of truth to that if you believe that. So instead of giving up on yourself, you've got to do a number of things. The first of which is probably pretty obvious, and that is, don't have a low sense of self-worth. Have confidence in yourself, not arrogance, but confidence, knowing that you've achieved a thing or two in your life and you're worth something. And you might still have work left to do, but know that you have enough ambition to accomplish those things over time. Because as they say, you are what you think. It's not really up to anybody else to decide who you are. So if you've determined that you have value, then other people will think that you have value, because you'll give off that positive energy and they'll gravitate towards you as a result. You've also got to understand that this concept of destiny is at a very minimum debatable. It's not that I was destined for mediocrity like I thought I was, that all these misfortunes were somehow interconnected in this vast conspiracy that the universe had against me to bring me down. But instead, these things are mutually exclusive. They don't really have any effect on each other, because as they say, everybody has ups and everybody has downs. You can have a really bad day today and then have a really great one tomorrow. Third, as cliched as it might sound, don't forget to persist, to keep trying, because sometimes you might get a second or a third or a fourth try, and you don't want to just leave those things lying on the table, because you don't really get extra points for making it on the first try versus the fifth or something like that. So going back to the college example, I had, until I was 23 years old, at least at the time, to get into West Point, to enroll. And I ended up applying twice, and then because I didn't make it those two times, I just gave up. But because I was 19 years old at the time that I gave up, I still had like 3 or 4 more attempts, and I didn't really follow those through. And to this day, I'm left wondering what would have happened if I had actually persisted. And finally, in those cases where you can't try again, because sometimes, like with that job I was talking about earlier, that's not really an option, there are still equally as viable options out there that you can pursue as alternatives. But if you give up, then again, you're going to lose sight of that, and you're not even going to get to take advantage of those. So in the example of West Point, even though I didn't go, I ended up doing ROTC as an alternative because thankfully I had a little bit of foresight. And the same thing applies for colleges and jobs. If you don't get the first one that you want, there are always other equally as good options out there. So to conclude, if ever you feel like giving up on yourself, don't do it. Instead, persist, try again, look for those alternatives, and you will make it eventually. Whereas if you just give up, then that's the only time that it's a guarantee that you're not going to make any progress or achieve anything. So if this helps, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.